Okay, so here's a problem I'm having with this new batch. It's this kind of filamentous little, I don't know, mold or something taking over or growing, and the neem oil has not touched this. I've applied it twice. So the next thing I'm going to try is a solution recommended by Curtis Stone, which is basically a little bit of white vinegar and a little bit of peroxide in water. So of course the vinegar is an acid type of chemical, a little bit of kind of like acetic acid. So maybe that's what the effect would be, is that acid will tend to discourage these things. Here we are at day 3 on this current crop. You can see that the mung beans are popping up very nicely, and also our garbanzos are starting to emerge. The best part here is that this is the area where the lettuce plants are, and you can see these guys beginning to pop out too. The package that I planted these from said these will emerge in 5 to 10 days. So at 3 days, that is a real testimonial to the value of having a warm soil, because typically these things are planted outside maybe when the soil reaches 50 degrees or so, and that means it takes a longer germination cycle. So here's the previous crop back here. We've pretty much got everything we can get from these, so I'm going to harvest this and let the soil dry out. And at this point I just want to put in a random thought regarding soilless productions such as hydroponics and aeroponics. What happens if the power goes out? Even for a couple of hours, it seems to me you're at the risk of losing everything. So if you're going to do soilless, you also need to think about having a backup power supply of some kind. Personally, I have a little stack of batteries down here that I keep charged up for various purposes, and along with an 1100 watt inverter, this provides me with some capacity for keeping things going if I had to. Even though it's just the beginning of February, I decided to start some heirloom tomato plants in this 6-pack here. This pack is located near the furnace in our house, where you can see the temperature is right about that nice 70 degrees sweet spot. For my next planting of microgreens, I'm going to make something that I'm going to call super soil, which you'll see in a minute. So as the measure, I'm using this old container from yogurt. I was watching a video that suggested using 1/3 compost and 2/3 potting soil. And then I went to Flowerland in San Francisco and picked up a selection of other EB Stone organics, including this bone meal. And here we have blood meal and green sand and agricultural lime. So they have a few more things like bat guano and stuff, which I may add later. But basically to the compost and potting soil, I'm going to add, I think, like a half a cup, measuring cup of each one of these to the soil mix. This is also going to be watered with my little mix of Miracle-Gro high nitrogen fertilizer, which has some micronutrients and also some liquid seaweed in it. I'm basically making the choice to stay with soil type production as opposed to soilless. It seems to me that the soilless production is a very delicate kind of system, very susceptible to infection because it has no natural protection. And of course it's also extremely vulnerable to power outages. And since some of this comes out of the prepping mentality, you want to think about whether or not you're going to have power whenever you need it to keep these things going. Okay, so here you can see how I'm just using a 5-gallon bucket to mix all those ingredients. So I've poured some of the mix into a tray that I've made, where I've made holes in the bottom with a hot nail. I'm using my little grater thing here. Okay, so this tray is going to be salad bowl blend. I think I'm seeding this pretty generously. Seeds are cheap, but I'm going to get a good germination rate out of this, so maybe too heavy again, but I will learn. And the thing here is that this is going to be a cut and come again sort of thing, where I expect to harvest from this bed several times. I have heard that when you do that, you do get a little bitterness, so I'll find out what the third cutting is like. Now a little bit of more dirt to cover the seeds. Don't call it dirt, I guess I should call it properly soil. difference between dirt and soil. Dirt is something you don't want to have around, whereas soil should be something beautiful to enhance growth, enhance life. It's great stuff. The next part is to wet this down somewhat with my mixture of filtered water and a little bit of Miracle-Gro high nitrogen and the micronutrient solution and a little bit of liquid seaweed. So I see in other operations that people are stacking their trays of microgreens in the sprouting stage, so I'm going to assume that's going to be safe here. I'm going to take out the ones that are in the holes that are sprouting. Set that aside. I'm going to put the new tray in. Since heat rises, I assume it will rise up from the first tray on the bottom to the second tray, and of course the second tray already has a pretty good start. There it goes. Put the top on. I mean, since this is doing pretty well, I think by tomorrow, the fourth day of the mung beans and garbanzos, I'm going to put that on the shelf and back and let that start to grow under natural light. I think with the lettuce in particular, I don't want to let that get too leggy before I put it out under the natural light. This is the fourth day of this current tray of starts. This is the section with the garbanzo beans. They don't seem to be doing much of anything, so I don't think I'll do this again. I don't even think I'll use garbanzos for sprouts. They belong in soup based on this kind of productivity. Here we have the star of the show, which is the mung beans. Mung beans, of course, are typically grown as sprouts, but if you grow them this way into microgreens, then you get the effect of having the chlorophyll added to the nutritional value. So these are doing quite well, and I'll probably do more of these in the future. And here we have the lettuce seeds, which are continuing to sprout at a nice rate. So I've redone my artificial lighting for this. What you see here are two $10 clamp lights, and I'll show you how this is hung up in a minute, but I want to start out by talking about light in general. From photography, I know that there was something called the inverse square law that applies to light, and basically what it means is that if you have the distance between a subject and the source of light, in this case the plants and the lights, you multiply the light by a factor of 4. Intensity is one of the things that affects plant growth, and as I watch all kinds of videos about various kinds of indoor microgreen and other type of growing, it seems to me that more often than not the lights are too far away from the plants and they are really sub-optimizing their situation. And a lot of times you see these kind of fluorescent strip lights which are throwing most of their light or a lot of their light to the side, but basically in all directions. That's really wasteful compared to having some kind of concentrating system such as this. If nothing else, when people use that kind of strip lighting, they should be hanging space blankets on each side of the shelf in order to keep the light reflecting back in. Also, I've done some research on the color temperature of the light. The bulbs I'm using here are the 5000 Kelvin compact fluorescents. Various sources, including a university in Canada, say that this is just fine for vegetative growth, that when you get to the flowering stage, you need the 3000 Kelvin. And I think what you do not need is those very expensive LED lights that people are selling. Here's the overall view, which just shows how these clamp lights are hooked to a stick that I had laying around the house. I rummaged around in my miscellaneous box of bolts and screws and found these hook eyes and just drilled a hole in a pilot hole into the joist and screwed them in. And I had another set of smaller hooks that I screwed into a pilot hole in the support beam. The cord you see here is your ever useful parachute cord, a piece about 4 feet long, something like that. This whole thing isn't very heavy, so I'm just using this binder clip as a clamp to hold the cord in place. The benefit of something like this is that It can be made adjustable to quite a distance. Here you can see that the two lights are just a few inches above the plants. I put a thermometer in there, and it was only up to about 72 degrees, which is a nice comfortable temperature. Here's the whole setup at this point in time. The warming tray, the trays of seedlings, the clamp lights, crossbar, and the suspension system.